Good evening, colleagues. It is an honor and a privilege for us at UNISA Press each time we have an opportunity to lay our eyes and our hands to each text that lands on our inbox. My name is Maya. I am one of the colleagues at UNISA Press. A number of my team members have also joined. I welcome each and every person from across the globe, across the continent, on behalf of our Vice Principal, Acting Vice Principal, Professor Ngwebe. We welcome you to this book launch. And again, on behalf of our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Puleng Linkapula, welcome to this book launch. I have no doubt in my mind, and if I may borrow from Les Brown, who said, not every day is a good day, but there is goodness in every day. Now, I'm pretty sure that there is goodness in this evening, and it has also been a good day. And the fact that we are here to come and celebrate, in the lack of a better word, this monumental work put together by huge figures, women of our globe, the continent, who thought it was necessary to get together and give us this beautiful text, Mothering African Women's Theologies. Even the title itself, it's very inviting. And I think in the context of when you predate disciplines like theology, historically were predominantly male dominated. Now, I'm very excited that as we sit around the table and converse, we're looking at these theologies from the women's lens, pioneers of the circle of concerned African women theologies. So this already is telling us this is coming from a drop from the sky, but if somebody's concerned about something, it means for some time they've been playing this in their minds. But that is not my role to get into the nitty-gritties and the jaws of the book. Mine is to say, you're home, welcome. And usually when I say to you, you're welcome at home, you can take off your shoes, put your legs on the table, have a glass of water and tea, and engage in this beautiful launch that we're having today. While I will probably also say this later as the program is unfolding, um, I would like us to listen with our ears and absorb with our hearts so that we can open our wallets at the end of this conversation and place as many authors as possible to make sure that this book lands on our shelves. It's still February month, it's still Valentine's month. Most of you will have not known what to buy for Valentine because it's the whole month anyway. This is a beautiful gift to those loved ones that you might want to share a gift with. I'll share with you later where to get the book so that you can lay your hands on this. With those few words, I don't want to waste much time. I will disappear in the back room. I want to call on a stage one of the editors, uh, Dr. Naicker, who will do most of the shipping and the steering and the captaining of this aircraft. Dr. Naicker, good evening. And over to you. You are in 2020, Dr. Naicker, for now. You are muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. I just want to say before I begin that we are expecting the VC, the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, Professor Puleng Lenkabula, to join us. And I may not see when she comes on, so because she's also has other important engagements. So when she comes on, if you would just alert me, and then I will stop and give her some time just to greet us. Is that okay?
Definitely.
Come on,
we'll
guys.
We'll
say yes.
I will do so. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Doc. All right, shall we begin then? Dr. Meia Ntosani, Director of UNISA Press, Professor Musa Dube, who I know is struggling to join us. She is an eminent biblical scholar and former continental coordinator of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, under whose leadership this project was conceived. Professor Mercy Amba Odioye, founder of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Dr. Molly Manyonganise, continental coordinator of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Professor Madipoane Masenya, widely known and deeply respected as Ngwana Mpashlele. Dr. Brigalia Baum, foundational witness to the Circle's birth. Professor Musimbi Kanyoro, distinguished theologian and ecumenical leader. Professor Christina Landman, historian and theologian. Dr. Mutale Kaunda, scholar, editor, and steward of theological memory. All senior members, past coordinators, and pioneers of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians present with us this evening. Distinguished members of the Circle, colleagues, students, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is with deep respect and profound joy that I welcome you to the launch of Mothering African Women's Theologies, pioneers of the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Today, we do more than introduce a book. We honor a movement. We recognize a genealogy. We stand with the living intellectual tradition. Before we continue, I would like to honor a suggestion that calls us into deeper connection. The Circle did not emerge without cost. It was nurtured by women whose labor, courage, scholarship, and faith made space where there had not been any. Some of those pioneers and Circle sisters are no longer with us in body, but their theological activities, their theological and activist voices, continue to shape us. As we launch Mothering African Women's Theologies, it is only fitting that we pause to remember those who have gone before us and those whose names are recorded in our histories, and those whose work may never have been fully documented, yet whose impact endures in our classrooms, our churches, and our communities. I now invite us all to observe 30 seconds of silence as we bow our heads in gratitude and remembrance. Shall we bow our heads? Thank you. May their memory remain a blessing, and may we be worthy stewards of the work they began. We are especially honored by the presence and leadership of our Vice Chancellor, who will join us shortly, Professor Puleng Lenkabule, whose commitment to justice-centered scholarship and institutional transformation continues to nurture spaces where African women's theological voices are not peripheral, but central. We honor Professor Mercy Amba Odioye, whose visionary leadership gave birth to the Circle and whose theological courage reshaped the landscape of African women's theological reflection. We honor Professor Musa Wenkosi Dube, under whose tenure as continental coordinator this project was conceived, and whose scholarship has continually expanded the horizons of African feminist and post-colonial biblical studies. We acknowledge Professor Madipoane Masenya, widely known as Ngwana Mpashlele, whose pioneering work in African and womanist biblical interpretation has profoundly shaped theological education on the continent and beyond. We recognize Dr. Brigalia Baum, whose public witness and foundational presence helped anchor the circle in faith, integrity, and institutional courage. We acknowledge Professor Musimbi Kanyoro, whose ecumenical leadership and theological scholarship have strengthened the circle's continental and global reach. We recognize Professor Christina Landman, whose work in history and theology has preserved and critically engaged the narratives that sustain this movement. We acknowledge Dr. Mutale Kaunda, soon to be professor, whose stewardship through scholarship, mentorship, and editing continues to curate the intellectual memory of the circle for future generations. We greet all senior members, past coordinators, and pioneers of the circle present with us this evening. We are the circle. We are custodians of a movement that continues to grow, deepen, and transform. It is often said, excuse me, it is often said that launching a book is easier than writing one, that sustaining a theological movement is harder than both. Today, we celebrate those who have done all three. Your presence dignifies this occasion. Your scholarship gives it substance. Your leadership gives it continuity. We are truly privileged to gather in this moment. Okay, it is often said that launching a book is easier than writing one, and sustaining a theological movement is harder than both. Today, we celebrate those who have done all three. Your presence dignifies this occasion. Your scholarship gives it substance. Your leadership gives it continuity. We are truly privileged to gather in this moment. In many theological histories, African women were treated as footnotes. Today, the footnotes take center stage. I will now invite each panelist to offer reflection of approximately 7 minutes so that we may hear from all voices and still have time for engagement. We begin with one whose theological imagination and courage catalyzed what would become the circle of concerned African women theologians, Professor Mercy Amba Odioye. Prof, in the 70s and 80s, at a time when African women's theological voices were largely marginalized within both ecclesial and academic institutions, you made the audacious decision to reach across the continent and convene women into theological conversation. You gathered scholars who were often isolated. You created space where there had been silence. You insisted that African women would speak for themselves. What compelled that gathering? What conditions made it necessary? And what did you understand even then about the risk and responsibilities of being a movement that will travel across generations? Prof. Mercy.
This is an awesome moment. I never thought I would be alive to see this. But here am I, with one foot in the grave, still talking about the circle, which I didn't think I will survive this long, to have to open such an awesome group of women doing awesome theology. I thank God for this moment, and I thank God for all of you. It's all of you who have created the circle. We have a proverb that says, if you start a path and nobody walks behind you, they call you a madman. Now I know I'm not mad because I cut a path, and here are all of us walking this path, and we thank God for all of us. We had a bit of a challenge, but we are back on. You were asking why I had to do the circle. I think I've told the story so many times that I don't even know where to begin. See, I found myself in a situation which led me to imagine that I was the only African woman studying Christian theology. Because when I went to Legon, way back when, to the Religious Studies Department, which was then Department of Theology, I was the only woman doing the BD, the bachelor's degree, which in those days we did from London. There were 3 or 4 other women, but they were doing other courses. And then when I came out, went to Cambridge, started work, I still found that I wasn't meeting women, African women who have done theology, or who are doing theology, or who are working with their theology. And this hit me very hard when I had the opportunity to be in the US in the university, which actually it's interesting that it is Brigalia who made it possible, who suggested my name for me to go to Harvard. And in Harvard, I now realize that if I don't take care, I would be a one-tree forest. And I didn't want to be a one-tree forest because a one tree cannot become a forest. So I discussed this, and then I, like an African woman who has come from quote unquote poverty, money was the first thing that came to my mind. Where was I going to find money to do this kind of thing? And then a friend of mine, a white woman, advised me, just start. The money is not the problem. Just start, it will come. So I started looking for women who have already done some theology, who are in theological schools. But then I found that very, very few scattered around. We were able to get together because Regalia was at that time in the World Council of Churches on the women's desk and had a meeting. And that meeting that he had, at that meeting, the African women who were at that meeting, I called them together and I said, sisters, we must do something or we are missing from the stage. And it was out of that meeting that the idea of the circle came. And as they say, the rest is history. When I look at the names and the positions and the books, there are women who are continuing, because that is what is important. Because when the 5, 6, 7, or 8 of us began, if nobody had followed us, this thing would have disappeared. But you all held it because you all saw that it was important that the women's voices in theology should also be heard. I know that we are still not very prominent, but some of us, a few of us whose names you have already mentioned, the impact we are making is enough. It's more than enough, and I thank God for that. And I'm praying that God will add more professors and more bishops and more lecturers and more women who are making an impact in the church and in the community and in the religious sphere to all of us, so that what God inspired me, pushed me, enabled me to begin, but not to begin just by myself, because this was not a one woman thing. Right from the beginning, I can still mention the names, but it will take so long. Right from Regalia's meeting, right from the meetings that we held in the World Council, right from the conference that Musimbi and I almost missed because we were sitting at the airport lounge planning the meeting still. We have increased, and God has used us mightily in the crafting of theology, in the developing of theology that is relevant to religion, relevant to women, is respected as coming from the deep faith of women of faith. I thank you for inviting me to this, because I didn't even think I would be able to sit up in this chair and talk. And now I'm sitting here. And now, as I have started talking, I'm not going to do 4 hours. I am going to stop right now and to say thank you very much, my sisters, for following up, because I cut a path and a lot of you are following, and more younger people are also, younger women are also following. In fact, I should say younger people, because now we have young men. You remember when Jesus had his team, he had the women who followed. Now we have the men who follow, and we thank God for that. Thank you all, and thank you for this, for this book, for the book, and for its launching.
Thank you, Auntie Mercy. What a joy, honor, and privilege it is to sit at your feet again. We are so honored and so blessed to have had you grace us with your presence. Brings tears to my eyes. Thank you so much. I know this wasn't easy in terms of connectivity and logistics, but you made it, you were here, and we are so grateful. We are so honored to call you Mama. Thank you. Okay, we now move on to Dr. Brigalia Baum. You were present at the Circle's formation, not only as a participant, but as a public leader whose life has consistently bridged faith, civic responsibility, and gender justice. In those early years, how was responsibility understood among you? What did collective courage look like in practice, especially within ecclesial and public spaces that were not always welcoming? And as we sit here today with the new generations of scholars in the room, what should they understand about the cost and the discipline of sustaining movements? My Prof, Dr. Brigalia Baum.
Thank you very much. As you have already said, it's a privilege, absolutely privilege, that I could be here. I never thought I would live long to be part of this wonderful time. Mercy, I can't believe that you and me are still around. Maybe God wants you to start something else, you know, and I promise I will join you, whatever you'll decide to start now. I remember Mercy Odioye. She is really the vision. Arriving in the World Council of Churches, we arrived on the same day in 1967, and we were the two young women at the time who were employed, and there was a young African Pastor Bejuska from Liberia. Now, at that time, the World Council of Churches, of course, didn't have many of us coming from what was then referred to, they don't use that anymore, third world, but we're coming from Africa, but where we were there. And I wanted to say to you, this young, brilliant scholar who was in the youth department, a typical Mercy who never shows her irritation, she never did, that's why she was very successfully doing what she was doing. We were hoping that she would be ordained. And so instead of her ordination taking place, the good Lord made sure that Mercy goes to be part of the world. And we never knew at that time in 1967, when she was a young woman. I was asking to tell me how long ago was this. I was asking my granddaughter, and she was telling me that it's such a long time ago. She said it's 59 years ago. Mercy, I don't know if you can believe that it's 59 years ago. This young theologian, our great pride, Mercy from Ghana. Ghana also at that time, as an African country, had a limelight for a lot of other things. Some of you might remember, those who read our history these days, that in fact it was Ghana that opened the doors for many countries in the African continent, beside Liberia and Ethiopia, to really be independent. And it was just normal that a Ghanaian would be there and the Ghanaian would be the person to do this. I never knew that Mercy would, the years that followed after that, because we meet in 1967, and there we are in 1989 in Ghana, and Mercy's dreams and Mercy's wishes had come true, because in all those years, she had been doing a lot of things, to make sure that one day, this great day of Ghana would really become a reality in her life and in many of our lives. And we were grateful to God that that was possible. And I remember the prayers of women of Ghana. I remember the speeches of the women in Ghana. I remember their wishes that they were expressing. And here we are today, that we are able, as the women of Africa, our daughters like you and granddaughters, can offer something to the world. Not only offer it for Africa to be understood, not only for Africa to be respected, not only for Africa to become a continent of reality, but for people to discover that the women of this continent are also there to make a contribution to the future world. And so Mercy did a lot of other things, which she would probably have to do another book before 1989. In all those long years from the time I had met her in 1967 until 1989 in Ghana, when finally her dreams and her wishes came true. And that was a beginning of a wonderful time, full of challenges, but Mercy's hope and personality was very helpful. We had, as Mercy had said, we had no money, and no one was really going to put money to something that the women were doing. We didn't have the respectability from the churches, let alone even from the ecumenical movement, because, after all, there was this department of which I was part of. Most of the people around the world, within the ecumenical movement, didn't even know what we were doing. I'm not sure myself. All I know is that we were grumbling and complaining about the exclusion of women from ordination. That was the biggest cry of the time. And came 1989, and really something happened to this continent. Something that this group of women, theologians, were there with amazing courage. You can't measure courage because it's something that is difficult to do until you begin to see the things people are saying. And because they were scholars, they were beginning to write. They were beginning to make already a contribution that the women in Europe and other parts of the world had started on feminist theology. And feminist theology, I will not go into that, but some of you have read the history and the difficulties of the lack of respect and understanding of what the women were trying to say. And all women were saying that they need space to think. They need space to contribute as theologians. And so it is my hope that the generations to come will be like you. The generations to come will have the determination. The generations to come will be proud of their heritage. This is your heritage. And this is a heritage of many more to come. And I hope that that courage and commitment and really faith that carried this organization from that time until today will continue, and will be able to continue to make a contribution, not only in the African continent, which it needs now more than at any other time. So Mercy, my friend, my beloved friend of those long years, we thank God that we are alive and we're part of this celebration. Thanks to the writers, thanks to our daughters who are there to make sure they document the history.
Yes.
And they want to make sure that they continue also what you already and many others started. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, mental. They muted, David. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Brigalia Baum. You know, I must say it's such a beautiful thing to observe the sisterhood, the camaraderie, the friendship between Dr. Baum and Auntie Mercy. It's a beautiful thing, and it has stood the test of time and the test of so many other things. And we are just grateful to the two of you for the legacy that you leave us, that we hold this sisterhood and this humanity in creative tension as we continue the work of the circle. All right, so we move on now to our next speaker, Professor Musimbi Kanyoro. Your leadership has also extended beyond the academy into global ecumenical and philanthropic institutions committed to women's dignity and justice. How has your theological grounding informed your work in those spaces? And how, in turn, have those global engagements deepened or reshaped your theological imagination? You have often reminded us that culture itself must be interpreted, neither romanticized nor dismissed, but examined fully and courageously. How has this commitment to cultural hermeneutics shaped the theological method of the circle over time? Over to you, Prof. Kanyoro.
Thank you very much, Linda, for chairing this on our behalf, all of us. Please allow me to begin by just acknowledging that it's really great to be in this Zoom room, with both Mercy and Brigalia. My time at the Ecumenical Center did not coincide with Brigalia, but because the ecumenical movement is large, we still met, and it's just such a privilege. My second acknowledgement is to acknowledge how we have generation after generation of the circle given on the candle, and remained in the movement. Maybe between Mercy and Brigalia, maybe in the next probably decade or generation. And they made sure that as they led, there were many of us who are also in the next coming generation, and we've continued to pass on the candle while remaining engaged. I say so because women have said over time that when you climb up, do not take the ladder away. And I think what I have seen in what we have done with the circle has been to keep that ladder on. But also, as has been said by other women, well, for as long as we have issues in the world that we need to deal with, to bring freedom to all people, and to bring freedom and liberation for women, we cannot, when we light the candle, disappear because we haven't finished the mission. So staying on of whom you have now named the mothers of the circle, having not disappeared, is a very useful thing, because the issues that we want to deal with in the circle are not solved. So we light the candle, and you keep your own candle and keep lighting other candles. And the third acknowledgement I want to make is the acknowledgement of the next generation. I want to call Musa Dube as the next generation from myself. That next generation, although the name is Rising Stars, I want to call them Risen Stars. And I want to call them Risen Stars because in our first publication, as you remember, and also in Marthe's theology, Arise, Daughter, was the theme that we began with. If we had to go back and give thanks to Jesus, we would say, thank you, Jesus. The daughters have arisen. What next? That's what we would be asking. I want to say that one of the what next is the book that the Circle have published. In responding to your question, I think some of what really taught us to be the Circle through Marthe's reflection was that what she has just said, one tree cannot make a forest. So right from the beginning, we used to say, where one or two are gathered, there exists the circle of concerned African women theologians. That gave us permission, if you are in a circle in your own country, that you could do something without waiting for the whole world to come to you. And again, in the beginning, we all acknowledged when somebody wrote something for the newspaper, or somebody wrote an article in the ecumenical book, or a chapter of a book, or even a very small section. This, for me, when you talk about collaboration and the bigger picture, was that we were learning to collaborate, but we were also learning to write and to publish, because that was the purpose of the circle, to remove the dearth of written work from African women. But it didn't begin by everybody having to bring out a book. We began by this collaboration is part of the fact that our books are always co-edited. This was not very popular in academia, because in academia you do your own book so that you can show off that you have obtained what it takes to be an academic person. I hope Musa would say something to that. But I think the circle, we've stayed the course of collaboration. And that collaboration means that we can co-edit. We are not worrying about the impact of one person, but we want to influence a bigger space. And talking of space, I think one of the things that I learned, which I took both in the ecumenical movement, but outside also the ecumenical movement, what we were doing in the circle was not in isolation. The women's movement had organized over many years before our time. And what we were doing is that we were joining that movement, such that even myself, when I left the ecumenical movement and went to work into secular movements, I could join a group of women that were doing similar things as the circle, but not beginning from a faith perspective. So I acknowledge things that I think supported our work. One is the ecumenical movement itself. You can see from what Marthe said, from what Brigalia said, from what I can say, it gave us the home from which to do not only theology, but to organize. When I was coordinator of the circle, I was a staff of the Lutheran World Federation. And believe it or not, the circle was accepted to be part of my program. I want to encourage everyone, every space that you have, you can take other dreams, other visions that you have, and influence that space and grow out of it, including for the fact that someone who told Marthe, don't worry, money will come, we started to ask for money from our own organizations. And this is where ecumenical movements were very useful. We cannot but stop to acknowledge the big role that the World Council of Churches played, also financially. I am one who believes that if you have a vision, money will come. That's exactly the same advice I would have given Marthe. And when money does not need to come from donors from outside, I want to be able to tell that to all of us. Money sometimes comes from ourselves, because the one little coin that the woman gave, made a lot of difference. and organizations that we have been part of, like the List Coin. We've seen how they fundraise. So I believe that we should continue with this inspiration and never let money stand on our way. And then the final area that I want to also mention is that in terms of women's organizing, I believe that the women's secular movements, such as the conferences on women, Mexico, Nairobi, Beijing, conferences that dealt with issues related to women, such as the Cairo conference, they were all part of our conscious raising of the issues that now we can ask, how do we do theology relevantly, bringing these issues that other people are dealing with, but not staying on theology as only scripture, but theology as people's lives in how they experience scripture. When I was a coordinator, HIV was rampaging the world and mostly our continent of Africa. And we were strong in trying to understand how our own churches, how the women, how the ecumenical movement, how the secular movement was dealing with HIV. That relevance has stayed with the circle. It has stayed with the circle very strongly. The role of women who are ordained was important to us. If you notice, Marthe, Brigalia, myself, Musa, we're all lay women. None of us is ordained woman. This, I want to say, also helped us to see how when we come together, ordained and lay persons, we can still collaborate and let the grace of God work through all of us. And I think this is a good testimony when we are in our churches and still insisting that we need to have ordination of women. I think I favor that very much. We were very proud in Kenya to have had our first ordained woman as a member of the circle, Nyambura Njoroge, my sister, my beloved sister. I call her little sister. We were very proud for that. And there are many ordained women now. And even in our circle, we tried as hard as possible to affirm women who are ordained, but also women who are lay. There are so many things that I could say about the circle, but I think that goes for the time that I have. And I celebrate to be part of this movement. And thank you, the risen stars and the stars that will begin to rise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Musimbi Kanyoro. I see now, I want to come back to Professor Kanyoro after this, but I see that our distinguished Vice Chancellor, Professor Puleng Lenkabula, is in the house. And we're really, really excited to have you here, Prof. Welcome. You are at home. Over to you, Prof.
I want to extend my appreciation for the celebration and commemoration of our, to use the word that Dr. Brigalia Bam has always invoked, for the living mentors that are our forebears in the generation or the construction of multiple generations of theologians, women theologians in the continent that attended to the emancipatory projects, not only of women, but women and their societies through the circle of concerned women theologians. I'm very appreciative also that our forebears, the founding mothers and scholars and intellectuals in the academic scholarship, in the ecumenical movement, but also in the advocacy systems within the ecumenical movement, have constantly shared with us wisdom and knowledge and reminded us that theology cannot be transformative or liberating if it's not entwined with its praxis and practice, if it's not entwined with the liberation of the very systems that are at the center of our oppression. And therefore, that intimacy is in this meeting that Dr. Auntie Professor Messi is in this meeting, that Dr. Brigalia Bam is in this meeting, that Auntie Prof. Kanyoro is in this meeting, Professor Masinya. Unfortunately, Professor Dube, I see you as the subsequent generation. So whilst we may celebrate your work, I'm thinking about this. I'm also honored that we celebrate this work, remembering just last month at the end, a friend of this founding theologians that ignited and formed us into a community, an epistemic community, to reflect together. I'm also thinking this coming together is a commemoration of those theologians or even partners to this journey that have passed on. And I thought I should also celebrate Omega Bula, because my first encounter in person in Ghana of the Circle of Concerned Women Theologians and the work that Auntie Messi was doing, not just within the Christian community, but also with Muslims and colleagues that did not affirm faith, but yet at the same time central to thinking about women. The first time I was exposed to the Kayoye women in the marketplace was precisely because we were convened not only in the academy, but in the church, in the ecumenical movement, and as multiple generations of women leaders who ought to think about our faith and spirituality. That first encounter of the circle has always remained etched in my heart, because the critical questions and the critical discussions around how we form, how we support, how we follow up on the generations of women theologians and the methods and methodologies that they were using was important. But it was also at the time when HIV/AIDS was a death-dealing system in our society, and reminding us to being attentive to the contextual and global exigencies of our times, and to be central to the solutions or even the theologies that were liberating, especially in the context of the continent. And in the aftermath of COVID-19, the questions that we ask about social justice, about emancipation, about the role of women, as well as how we mentor, I think still remains important. As the Woman Vice Chancellor in the context of South Africa, with the experiences and the mentorship by the circle, I'm very appreciative, because some of the resiliency that has had to be invoked would have been drawn from learning about the leadership of these forebears that are so profound, whose works, whose outputs, whose theologies, whose books have become central to how we think about the present and the future. And I'm very grateful, because if they hadn't been the pathfinders, if they had not opened the pathways to the ceilings, or even to the length of breadth of theology, many of us might not have known what it means to have generational mentorship. I want to say on behalf of UNISA Press, we are always committed to partnering with the Circle of Concerned Women Theologians. We deem it as a privilege and an honor to have had the partnership for the publication of this important book. I'm hoping that we will prescribe it in our theological schools and not just allow it to remain in the libraries. And I extend my heartwarm and heartfelt gratitude to the presentations that have been made, but to the circle for continuing to be a partner to all of us in the pursuit for justice in a changing world where death-dealing principalities maim us as women, maim our ecology, and name our churches. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I was just greeting, but I also appreciated the moment to really encounter anew the very mentors that are amongst us. Thank you very much. I wish you all success and the book to multiply. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lenkabula. We are so deeply honored that you found the time to come in and greet us and share such a wonderful message. We know that you are juggling many balls at one time, that there are many irons in the fire. So it's deeply moving that you found the time to come and address us, and we are extremely grateful and thank you for the beautiful compliments. And as we move forward now, I just want to go back a little bit to Professor Musimbi's address and say thank you there, Prof. I know we had to do a bit of a rush, and just to say that, you know, the way you have described the circle and the task of the circle and the mentorship and its continuation. It is so evident in the way you said it, that you were a generation who mentored people like Professor Dube, who mentored us. And so I want to say thank you also. It's such a joy and an honor to see you here finally, Professor Dube. You made it. We were just saying that this project was your brainchild and that you have mentored us from beginning to end on this project. And we are deeply honored and grateful for you and for the mentorship that is the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians. Professor Dube, I just want to know, would you like to say a few words at this juncture? You have missed out on a few. I will send you the transcript of all the nice things we were saying about you. I just thought maybe I'd give you an opportunity to say a few things.
Okay. If we are at the end of the program, because
we are not to speak. It's not the end. We are not at the end. I just thought you'd want to greet people because we were really anxious that you were not going to join us. We were unable to. We can continue then and wait for you to take the end. Is that okay?
Yes. I'll take
all
the
right.
end. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Shall we move forward then?
Thank
all
you.
right. I do believe that Professor Landman is here. Can somebody confirm?
Yeah.
Yes, enjoy.
Okay. I just want to say that Professor Landman has not been very well. She has been in recovery. And, you know, this is just to show the dedication of our mentors and our matriarchs in the circle. You know, from your hospital bed, you're here to grace us with your presence. We are deeply honored, Prof. So Professor Landman, as a historian and theologian who has worked intensively with questions of memory, narrative, and lived faith, you have helped preserve and interpret the stories that sustain movements such as the Circle. Over the years, how have understandings of memory and continuity within the Circle shifted? What have we learned about how movements remember themselves? Narrative is powerful. It can inspire, but it can also simplify. How do we tell the story of pioneers and foremothers without idealizing them and without flattening the complexity of their struggles? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. You know, it's for me a very special privilege to speak here. I don't think my camera is working, thank God. Because I'm lying in bed. I had a back operation, so I may not even sit up straight. But being here is very healing. I was not one of the 69 women who started the circle. I joined the second then Pan-African Conference in 1996, which was in Nairobi, in Kenya, and it was on women in the household of God. And that week or those few days totally changed my theology, totally changed from white male to integrate voices I've never heard before. And to at that stage, worldwide, actually, the focus of women as feminist studies, theological studies, was actually on the Bible. It was on identifying the symbols taken from the Bible that were patriarchal, the sexist language of theology, the misinterpretations of women's stories and the neglect of women's stories in the Bible. And that is where the circle began doing its work. And those were absolutely exciting. And the people I've met there, they were extremely exciting. Musimbi Kanyoro, they were just, I can't even, they were the women whom we find in this book and about whom you can now read, people you have carried in your theology through many stages, for many, many centuries, decades. And what has happened, so the first focus of the circle was on the Bible and on biblical interpretations of societal issues as well. And then eventually it went more to practical theology in the sense of, widowhood and people who were, and on women's plight in society, and on female genital mutilation. And I still have those books, which I cherish very, very, I really cherish them because those are mind-boggling pieces of work. Your second question is, how can we remember without idealizing? I think in some sense we need to idealize. We need to idealize what has happened in the 1980s when Marthe Oduyoye, I think it was with money from EQUAT and money from the World Council of Churches, brought women from all over Africa together to talk theology. It is almost unthinkable. And now, when you think back of those days, 1980s, 1990s, it was just somebody with an exceptional vision who could do that. Oh yes, I wanted also to say the great game changer in African biblical hermeneutics was, of course, the book by Musa Dube. On what was it called? Postmodern feminist interpretations of the Bible or something like that. It's just that book changed the world. Nobody writes anything about African women's theology without quoting from that book. But I think that the women who started the circle, sorry, you must stop me. I have another 2 or 3 minutes. But the women who started the circle, it's almost incredible when you think about it, and who took it forward from one Pan-African conference to another Pan-African, for 6 of them since 1989 and 30 years later in 2019 in Botswana. It was, so in a sense, we need idealize them because they did what none of us can anymore do today. But what they did was the driving vision with money, which they need to get the money to do these things, and they actually executed this vision, which was, when you think about 1980s, bringing 400 African women theologians together in a conference. It's unthinkable almost how enormous that vision was, and that it was held up by one after the other women for 30 years, and that we have now moved to eco-theology. We have moved to extremely exciting studies. But those first women authors and visionaries, I think we must not leave them out. And therefore, this book is extremely important because it brings together these women. South Africa, I think, was presented at that first conference by Brigalia Bam and the woman from the Moravian Church. Later, I don't think Professor Puleng is still with us, but I think that when Mercy Amorejoy started the Institute for Women in Culture at Trinity College, it was me and she who were there. And so she has played a major role also in the development of the circle. Sorry, what was the last question? I think there were 3 questions, or haven't I answered everything? Now I cannot hear you. Linda, you are muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted, Prof. Let me just check what the last question was. Narrative is powerful. It can inspire, but it can also simplify. How do we tell the story of pioneers and foremothers without idealizing them or flattening the complexity of their struggle? I think you have covered it, Prof. But if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think, I'm at the moment, so the method I use in narrating events historically is autoethnographical. It means that you tell a story through your own experiences. And I think that we should just get down and write our stories through our own experiences and thereby keep the circle alive. It's nice to write about other people, but writing a story through your own, interpretation can easily become colonization. So I'm always wary that when I write somebody else's story that I'm colonizing that person's story. So I would actually say that all of us should write our own stories. Yeah. The story of the circle through autoethnography so that we can have our own perspectives there. And I particularly remember when I look at Musimbi Kanyoro here, Musimbi, your book was, I think, one of the most influential books in my whole life. So I just wanted to slip that in.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Landman. Thank you. That was really, really powerful and engaging. And we are so grateful to you, Prof, that you could make it here. And we wish you a speedy recovery. We know you're not well. We wish you a speedy recovery. And we want to thank you for your strength. You are such an example to us. And we pray that God bless you. Okay, can we move on then? You're welcome, Prof. Professor Madipoane Masenya Ngwana Mpashlele, your work in African womanist biblical interpretation has insisted that African women read scripture from the textures of their own lives, their languages, culture, struggles, and faith communities. You have often asked, who benefits from the way we read the Bible? In your view, Prof, how has the circle reshaped biblical interpretation on this continent, not only academically, but within faith communities?
Yes, okay, yes, thank you so much. It's thrilling to really be here. It's almost like a dream. And when Aunt Messi, I used to call her Mani Messi, Mani in the Sesotho language. When she actually said, I'm speaking with one foot in the grave and one foot outside, I was kind of touched. And I also noticed that she and Mama Brigilia Bem kept on wondering or marveling that they are still here in our midst. And I was reminded about a book that I'm reading at the moment that says, Nearing Home, Finishing Well in the Journey of Faith. So thank you so very much that, you started this big organization. You started small and it became so big and played a critical role in conscientizes some of us who were steeped in racism, in patriarchy within the broader South African apartheid culture, within our African cultures, and awakened us to reading texts, whether the sacred texts in our cultural context, like the Proverbs, like the riddles and so forth. And Manimesi, thank you so much. Somehow, I think as I now look back into the Basadi theorization, I realize that how your work in critiquing folklore, while you bring it forth so that the people will know that we also have folklore. You know, when the colonialists came through, it was not as though Africa didn't have anything. So it somehow shaped my reading of biblical texts or even sacred texts in our context. But let me not be so long because my line manager has already spoken. So to thank you so very much and to say that there were also therefore generations, as you also affirmed, of scholars who followed and sort of carried the baton. And among them, we cannot but single out in particular Professor Musa Dube in terms of pushing, us to, particularly during the HIV and AIDS era, to really theologize and do biblical hermeneutics in the context of a pandemic that was really death-dealing. And some of you will know that she even had to stop, doing her business as usual at the University of Botswana and to go throughout the continent. But that was not only enough, was not only all. She also, with the other ways of reading, I think, Christina, that's the book you were trying to quote back in the dawn of the century, other ways of reading African women in the Bible, and therefore putting African women, biblical scholars, on the map in the SPL that, still remains basically Eurocentric and Western, Euro-American centric and centered in the approach to the Bible. And now to this recent, your leadership that brought these books that we're having right now, wherein a very important aspect, a subject that have always been in the background or on the margins for our works as African female or women scholars, ecology. So therefore to say we are aware of the important role you played and want to also congratulate you, even as I congratulate all the founding mothers, all those who followed after you, and also now these younger scholars who are doing miracles. And right now here in the Southern African region, Dr. Naicker, you all are doing a great job. I read your conversations in the circle, a space I do not always have an opportunity to respond fully, but I appreciate all that you have been doing and you keep on doing. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are so honored to have had Prof. Masenya share with us, especially since we know that the Office of the VC is a very busy space, and that the Professor Lenkabula and Professor Masenya actually made it to join us is a miracle in itself. So we are deeply honored. Thank you. And we can now move on to our very own Dr. Mutale Kaunda, soon to be professor. Dr. Kaunda, as the scholar, editor, and steward of theological memory, your work has ensured that the intellectual labor of the circle is not only produced, but preserved, curated, and made accessible to future generations. Editing and archiving are often invisible forms of leadership. What does stewardship look like from that vantage point? What responsibilities accompany the shaping of how a movement is remembered? And as we honor the foremothers of the circle, how do we do so with gratitude and clarity? How do we honor them with gratitude while still engaging their work critically and honestly? Over to you, Mutale.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. I hope I'm not muted. No, I'm not. Yeah, so thank you so very much. I really want to appreciate our pioneering Circle mothers who have already spoken before me. And as they were speaking, I said to myself, what a joy to listen to the wisdom that exudes from them. And also I imagined if we could just have them all in this one room here and just listen to their wisdom, what a joy that would be. Now, coming to respond to the questions that you have raised, Linda, editing this volume for me was not merely an academic task. It was a moral and theological responsibility. And I think that when the pioneers of the Circle first met, they did not imagine themselves as founding figures to be celebrated. I think they gathered because there was an urgency. African women's experiences of God, of church, of culture, and struggles were missing or misrepresented, even silenced. So this book is our response to that urgency decades later. Now, being part of the editorial team, I came to understand that biography is actually theology. To tell the story, the life stories of these pioneers, is to trace how faith was lived under conditions of immense patriarchy, colonial legacies, ecclesial exclusion, and yet profound resilience. We are still working as women to be in certain spaces that allows human flourishing to date, but they paved the way for us so that we could at least walk easy. Their lives show us that theology was not merely written in lecture halls, but that it was carried in bodies, it was carried in relationships, it was carried in activism, and even in prayer. And therefore, editing these biographies meant listening carefully with humility to the lives that had already spoken so powerfully. And therefore, archiving these stories was also an act of justice and accountability. Too many African women theologians have shaped the field without being properly recorded in institutional memory. If we do not gather their stories now, we risk allowing the tradition to forget its own mothers. And having mentioned mothers, I would like to explain the idea of mothering in this volume that we have edited. So the idea of mothering in this volume, I'm going to just make a direct quote from the book. The idea of mothering in this volume is therefore understood as, in a metaphorical sense, as the circle's capacity to give, to nurture, and to affirm life in a context where patriarchal forms of religion, culture, and related institutions marginalize African women. This way of thinking about mothering is in keeping with African wisdom and traditions of it takes a village to raise a child. This principle is grounded in the pro-existence of mothering, the primordial capacity to nurture, to care, and to heal others as an inherent responsibility of all human beings. In the African worldview, mothering pre-exists as a relational principle that constitutes care, nurture, giving life, and affirming life. And according to our founding mother, Auntie Mercy Odioye, I quote, "Mothering, biological or otherwise, calls for a life of letting go, a readiness to share resources and to receive with appreciation what others offer for the good of the community." She clarifies further that African women who choose to mother in the most difficult contexts and circumstances do so because they carry and model the ethic of caring for the other, the quest to see the other become a whole person, end of quote. So this is what the editing of this volume shows of our pioneering mothers. They gave their all for this space. This volume insists that the circle's history belongs not only to the past, but to the future of African theology. And I want also to say that this editorial work resists the myth of the lone theological genius. The circle was and remains a communal intellectual project. But by bringing these biographies together, we honor a network of women who mentored one another, challenged oppressive structures, and created space for younger scholars. Editing in this sense becomes an act of stewardship rather than control. And therefore, this volume is not the final word on the pioneers of the circle. No, it's not. It is an invitation to remember, to learn, and to continue to the work that they began. And as part of the editorial team, I see myself not as the owner of these stories, but as accountable to the pioneers who trusted us with their life stories, because we had to make contact with some of them just to clarify some of the things that we found on them. And the generations of African women theologians who will build on this legacy. How do we honor our intellectual mothers? We honor our intellectual mothers best not by placing them on pedestals, of course we should, but by also keeping them in conversation with us. Freezing them into untouchable symbols actually betrays the very spirit of their work, which was courageous, which was questioning, and often disruptive in terms of disrupting what was seen as normative. We do this firstly by telling their entire stories, not sanitized ones. In this book, we resisted hagiography, which is a biography that treats its subject with undue reverence and as though they are saints. Our foremothers were brilliant. They were also situated in particular contexts. They made strategic compromises. Obviously, if you ask them, they disagreed with one another at some point. And sometimes they changed their minds. And therefore, honoring them means allowing their humanity to remain visible, because struggle, uncertainty, and growth are part of intellectual courage. We also honor them by treating their work as unfinished, not closed. Yeah. The circle itself was born out of critique of theology that ignored African women's lives. To honor its pioneers, we must be willing to extend, we must be willing to question, and even to revise some of their insights in light of the new realities. Reverence that forbids critique turns living theology into a museum. They pioneered by not working alone. They mentored. If you ask them, they will tell you that at times they argued, but still collaborated and built institutions. Honoring them means investing in the conditions that made their work possible, mentoring younger scholars, protecting spaces for bold feminist theology, and ensuring access for voices still marginalized. That way, honor becomes a living practice, one that keeps their legacy dynamic, accountable, and transformative, rather than static and untouchable. And we are talking about being responsible for preserving what we are responsible. First of all, we are responsible for preserving, and what are we responsible for transforming? If we look at our Dr. D.M. Simbi Kanyoro talked about culture being not, that we are able to encourage that which is culturally positive and builds life. And then we are not able to promote certain cultural aspects that are dehumanizing to women's lives. So in the same way, we look at some of the ways of preserving and transforming what our pioneers have done so far. And in this framing, we are saying that it continues the pioneers' conversation and research on power, access, and inclusion. It continues to raise questions about generational dynamics and language. How are younger scholars, grassroots theologians, and non-academic women included or excluded in shaping the future of the circle? Those are some of the questions that we should continue to raise. Rather than revering pioneers as untouchable figures, stewardship encourages dialogical engagement. Research can explore how critique, disagreement, and creative reinterpretation functions as acts of faithfulness rather than betrayal. And stewardship demands that ethical responsibility. This invites research into how the circle measures faithfulness to its founding commitments, gender justice, contextual relevance, and social transformation, especially when operating within institutions that may resist some of these values. I think for now I will end here, Linda.
Thank you, Mutale. And I just, from your brief talk, Mutale, I want to present this as evidence to the matriarchs, to our mentors. Have you heard, Mutale? The circle going forward is in good hands. You have mentored the younger generation well, and we will take this baton and go forward. That is our commitment to you, as you have committed to us. I want to now just ask the organizers, Ms. Swanepoel, I see you here, and Ms. Madonsela. Ordinarily, we would have had time for a few questions before I hand over to Professor Dube to close, but I'm not sure if we have enough time for questions. Can any one of you just comment on that? If I can open the floor for questions, maybe one or two before Prof. Dube does the closing remarks.
I think Dr. Ntrasani would probably agree for 3 questions.
All right then, wonderful. Okay, let's open the floor for questions. We'll take 3, and just to ask that we keep them brief, and also that if we are directing the question at someone, then we can just name the person who we are directing the question to. Please, you can either type your question in the chat or raise your hand, and Mutale will assist, and also Mbali and Ms. Swanepoel, if we can identify any hands that are raised. Oh, hi, Dr. Elizabeth. How are you?
Such a special occasion. So thank you to you first, Dr. Naicker, for, bringing us all together, you and your team. And I think I'm just so profoundly moved to be in the company or to listen to many of the women that I quoted recently in my PhD, because it was, I'm a young, just recent PhD holder. So thank you so much for your journey and for your life and for your witness. It really, really helped us, that is coming and trying to make all kinds of shifts from our end. I want to know maybe a little bit more about the book, where we would get the book, and if there's any sort of just a little bit of an overview of, what we can find in the book. So that would be my question. I don't know who would be able to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm not sure whether we want to do a synopsis or maybe hand over to Dr. Ntsoane to maybe just give a few details.
I said the book is available if you want a hard copy, my colleagues will drop in the link where you can order the books at UNISA Press. It will also be available online, and from our distributors, Take a Lot, Exclusive Books, and other EBSCO and other international distributors. Because it's an open access, you can read it for free online, but if you want to print it, that's how you will then get to pay for it. But my colleague has just dropped a page of the details of the book. It's 380 rand. It's a Valentine prize. That stays forever.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. Mutale, I think there's a question in the chat, but I cannot see the entire thing. And for some reason, this cursor of mine is not moving up to get it. Can you read it?
Okay, so there is one question that was raised by, just give me a second. Okay, so the first question is raised by Heta. We collaborated with Heta in the beginning of the publication, and she's asking, could there be plans for a modern follow-up book on the current mothers? I think, Musa, would you like to respond to that? I think that there is one in the pipeline. I think so. But maybe Musa has better response to that.
Yes, Musa. We can't hear you. You're muted. Musa?
I could respond to that as part of the way forward.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then there is one from Marisha. It's a long one. I'll just read it. So just a general question. Sorry, it's not short. Then she thanks our storytellers, our sisters. Listen, no. I'm wondering, how do we better enrich our relationships, foster deep self and collective care? We have heard from each other that we have experienced multi-generational violence and traumas, which not only impacts our daily life and relationships, but also the way we work, how we engage, and how and what we write about. In the circle, we are promoting collective deep care, yet we are also part of systems, academic, religious, economic, community, legal, health, family, etc. And we are dismantling these systems of injustice, oppression, and inequalities while also being a part of it. At times, we may not be aware that we are upholding these systems too. We are also counting the cost to what it takes to transform these systems or give birth to more just and compassionate ones. We know we have lost loved ones on this journey and we bear the scars. What do we need to be mindful of and put into practice as we journey on so that we do not pass on the internalized hurts and injustices, actually?
It's a profound question.
It is a profound question.
Is there anyone, Professor Kanyoro, Auntie Mercy, anyone want to venture a response? Or anyone else?
I see we've also got our some of our pioneering mothers within the audience. You could also come on board.
Yeah. I really can't see who's in the house. So even if a pioneering mother from who's in the audience wants to address that, if not, we'll hand it over to Professor Musimbi Kanyoro. Thank you.
I think it's a genuine question. When I first joined the women's movement, I had this notion that if you are all women, everything is just really nice and nothing is going to go wrong. But in the bigger world of women's movements all over, both faith, interfaith, secular women's movements, there have been tensions, and sometimes people misinterpret those tensions as women don't like working with each other. There are many reasons why there are tensions when it's women on. Some it's because of our inherited the biases, that we don't see each other because we weren't used to seeing each other culturally. It's part of our cultural interpretation. And sometimes it's true that when we rise sometimes as women, we don't create space for the others. That is also true. It needs to be looked at. But I think that question also addresses the fact that we can be safe, say, within the circle and really love and charm one another. But as soon as we get out, we are not just women and we are not just circle. We are interrogating many issues. We are intersecting in many places. We are actually with many other people who don't even share our values. And sometimes we are violated because in our values, sometimes of caring for one another or whatever, or being collaborative. Sometimes the tensions are for academicians, publishing. Sometimes people don't value what we say because we haven't said it in the way that they want us to say it. You write an academic book for your certification so that you can become something else, and other people do not see it the way you have seen it. All this bring hurt to us. But then there's every day that women go through gender-based violence, which everyone, every country can be able to identify and put somebody they know, if not themselves, if not ourselves. All this bodily harm us. So sister who asked this question used the words of self-care. Self-care, the word self-care is very, very, it's a la mode. It's in fashion today. Everybody's talking about it. It might mean going inside yourself and seeing what hurts and trying to see where you get help. And it can be professional help. It can be talking to a sister. It can be writing it down. It can be repentance. If you do confessions, you can go and confess, whichever. These are all self-care. But I think the problem with self-care, when left only as self-care, sometimes we go internally, or we close others, or we don't listen to what else is happening because we are self-caring for ourselves. So we have to have a self-care that is also caring for the others. Self-care doesn't mean just ourselves. The person asked in the context of justice, and I think I want to conclude by saying it's always been said that justice is not just us. So when you think of justice, think of who is next to you, because people don't just hurt themselves, they get hurt by others. And there's a lot of harm and hurt and pain all around us. And I think as people of goodwill, I don't want just to say circle or say women, but as people who, as the humanity that is called both scripturally and just by our morals, etc., I think being awake to see our neighbor suffering and doing something about it will heal our own suffering. Thank you.
Amen. Friends, brothers, sisters, we can go on forever. It would be lovely if we could continue this conversation forever, but we must now hand over to our very awesome Prof, Musa Dube, for some concluding remarks. And thank you all. This has been really, really awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. My task is to thank everyone who's here. First, I want to thank God who has brought to this place. And I also want to begin by remembering Reverend Jesse Jackson, who has gone to be with the ancestors today. I want to thank first and foremost the founders of the cycle. I want to thank Ms. Oduyoye, the bearer of the vision, the bearer of the fire, who shared the fire with other women, and these women who took the fire and ran with it. So it happened that I thought, well, it's been a while since they started this movement in 1989, and maybe we need to go back to the place where they launched the cycle. This was the time when I was the leader of the cycle. So I said then, if we are going back, let's find out who are these women. Let's write a book about the story of each of the founding women. So I asked Mutale if she could lead us in this project. And we found co-editors from every region who would collect the names and work with her so that we put the stories in preparation to go back to Ghana to a conference that we called Sankofa, namely Return or Look Back. So this is the story of the book. It was in preparation for the Sankofa conference. This is a book we had expected there. Now we put up the editors. After we put up the editors, a report came back that more women in the cycle say they want to write than the 70 that we have that must write each chapter. That was amazing. I was like, oh, so it was amazing what this book did, because when the report came that said more women in the circle want to write than the 70 chapters we have. Then I said, oh, what are we going to do? So I came up with the projects that let's have regional books. East Africa, we'll have a book that will assess what theology has risen from the East Africa, what has been written, what has been achieved, what are the gaps. So we had a book there on M.Kaunda, East African Women's Theologies of Liberation. Then we had a book in Southern Africa, which was, no, M.Kaunda was actually Southern Africa, Theologies of Southern African Women Theologians, where we wanted to map all the theologies that came out of there, the methods, the gaps, what has been achieved. We did the East Africa, which was Queen of Sheba, East and Central Africa, again, mapping these theologies that have risen from the circle. And then we had the West Africa, which was itself called Sankofa, Theologies of Liberation from West Africa. On top of that, we decided that, we feel that maybe African indigenous religions had not been given the attention it needs. So I had a book on African indigenous religions that we cut into 3 parts. When we took it to the publishers, they said they wanted those 3 parts to be independent books. Before we realized it, this book that we are launching today had given birth to 11 different volumes. And funny enough, 9 of those volumes were out by the time we got to Ghana, before this one was out. So, well, it was just an amazing experience that sitting down with the stories of the founding members of the circle came to give birth to so much. So the question has been asked, are we going to write the stories of current mothers? I think there's so much that still needs to be done. And the first step way forward, yes, at the regional level, we tried to write a chapter about each woman's work, what they did, the methods they produced, the theologies they produced, from Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. But one of the things that definitely needs to be done now is books on these founding mothers, on their theologies. Some of them have produced enough work to be written. So we see that from the world, people have been writing some work on maybe the work of Mercy Odue, for example. But to tell the truth, we can have books, and I want to urge the young scholars who are doing PhD to produce books on the theology of our founding mothers. And if there are some current leaders whose work deserves to be or is sufficient enough to be investigated, again, the answer that was asked, I think we can do that. I believe that we have to keep on, as Mutale have said, to hold on to the vision of these founding members, and at both regional levels, national levels. I think so far we did work from regional levels, and we can do work at national level. We can do work at individual level. The thing is that we need to keep the fire, going. And I want to appeal to our youngest scholars, especially those who are still going into masters, those who are still going into PhDs, to enter this research area and bring up, the stories that needs to be written, the analysis that needs to be written. As I said, we only did it at charter level, but there's so much that can be done. And I want to also encourage our professors who are mentoring our young people to point out this research area as a place that needs to be further, investigated. Yes, I want to thank
all the editors for the mighty work they did, trying to reconstruct the stories of 70 women. Some of them we couldn't find anything on them. We had to write poems, prayers, because we said we want to reconstruct a story about every woman who was listed as having been there. And I want again to thank our writers who took up the task to investigate. Sometimes it was very, very difficult to find anything. And sometimes there was resistance from the families, especially about those founding members who have passed on. And really, I really want to thank you all. I also want to thank the publishers who have made sure that this volume is here. Although it has come at the end, ironically, it was supposed to be at the very front. But we are grateful for this space because it gave us another occasion to reflect, another occasion to, to celebrate, another occasion to look forward. And as we look forward, there is indeed a lot of work to be done. I want to thank you again, the founding mothers who have started this vision. I want to thank you, the young people who have written the rising stars of the circle, because you are the one who are running with this flame. Thank you all. Let's keep on with the vision. Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, Bragalia Bam. Thank you, Kanyoro, for all the support you have given, that you continue to give, not just from the time when you started, but you also continue to accompany this movement. We've been very, very grateful for your support. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not sure if Dr. Ntusane wants to say something before we close. Do I hand over to you, Doc?
No, I think we're right at the close. I just want to thank everybody who joined us and enjoy the evening. Nothing from my side.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. May the circle continue, not only as a memory, but as a method, not only as inheritance, but as responsibility, not only as history, but as a living practice. Good night, everybody. God bless you. Thank you for joining.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.